Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a story that honestly reads way less like your standard dry business report and a whole lot more like a high-stakes geopolitical thriller. We're going to look at a seemingly simple corporate leak, but treat it as the opening scene of this massive drama over the future of tech manufacturing. On the surface, sure, it's about a smartphone. But underneath, it is a fascinating narrative about global leverage, massive supply chain shifts, and the intense rivalry between two of the world's biggest economies.
So our story kicks off with this wild viral claim made by a Chinese iPhone repair specialist named Ma Shuhua. He posted a video that completely took the internet by storm, outlining what were supposedly the leaked specifications of Apple's unreleased iPhone 13 Pro models. But you know what? It wasn't the specs that ignited this whole conversation. It was his bold claim that, quote, something like this would never happen in China. That's the real hook here. It wasn't just about screen sizes or camera lenses anymore. It was a direct, very public challenge regarding exactly where our technology is actually built.
All right, Section 1, the Tata Electronics cyber attack. Let's look at the inciting incident here, the event that exposed some serious vulnerabilities in the global tech supply chain. Where did those iPhone 13 Pro specs actually come from? Well, these purported details were leaked right after a cyber attack hit an Indian supplier called Tata Electronics. Highly sensitive Apple blueprints were just suddenly spilled right out into the open. Now, in the world of tech manufacturing, blueprints for an unreleased flagship product are incredibly closely guarded secrets. So for a breach like this to happen at a supplier facility, it's a massive security event, and it immediately raised a ton of questions about just how safe these new manufacturing hubs really are.
Moving on to Section 2, China's propaganda gold.
Now, what's really interesting here is how quickly this security breach was weaponized by Chinese leadership. It brilliantly illustrates the competing strategic maneuvers happening right now on the global chessboard. You really have to look at the motivations. For a leadership that is desperate to keep American companies locked into China's supply chains, this leak, it was absolute propaganda gold. China's in this fierce competition with lower-cost countries, and they want to retain those supply chains, the jobs, and of course the trading leverage. Meanwhile, India is stepping into this emerging role, which Beijing immediately painted as a vulnerable, risky alternative.
And the media apparatus over there seized on this moment instantly. The Communist Party's Global Times newspaper published these stark warnings, really highlighting what they called systemic weaknesses in the Made in India initiative. They essentially used this leak to argue a very specific point to the rest of the world. Replicating supply chains in other countries is no easy task. It was a clear, coordinated reminder from the press of just how incredibly difficult it is to move production away from a well-established hub like China, especially for a product as complex as an iPhone.
Which brings us to Section 3, Apple's high-stakes diversification.
So the big question is, why is Apple taking on these monumental risks with its most popular consumer product in the first place? Well, it all boils down to geopolitical risk. As global tensions have just continued rising everywhere, heavy dependence on China has simply become way too risk-laden for major multinational corporations. Apple, along with a bunch of other companies, has essentially been forced to aggressively diversify their operations. They're trying to spread out that risk so they aren't totally reliant on a single nation for their entire manufacturing pipeline. And they're doing this even knowing that the transition comes with major growing pains like, cyber attacks and massive leaks.
And looking at the timeline builds this incredible chronological contrast. On one hand, we have the cyber attack and the iPhone 13 Pro blueprint leak at Tata Electronics. But on the other hand, despite those hurdles, just last year, Apple successfully produced its top-tier devices, the iPhone 17 series, right there in India for the first time ever. This is a massive milestone. It shows us that while the transition is definitely bumpy, the overarching strategy of moving top-tier production to new regions is already fully underway, and it's actually yielding high-end results.
So how did Apple actually react to this great leak? They remained completely silent. Apple declined to comment on the leak itself, and they declined to comment on their supply chain plans. And honestly, that silence tells us a whole lot. It strongly suggests that while this kind of corporate espionage is definitely embarrassing and generates a ton of loud headlines, it might not actually be serious enough to change Apple's course. That massive multi-billion-dollar supply chain shift, it just keeps moving forward, totally unaffected by the noise.
Okay, Section 4, the copycat reality check.
Let's step away from the high-level geopolitics and the corporate boardrooms for a second and visit the ground level to see if these stolen blueprints actually matter in the real world. To find out, we have to talk about Fortune Bay. This is a legendary electronics market in China, widely known as the go-to place where old iPhones are bought and sold. It's this bustling hub where technicians are literally famous for their incredible ability to refurbish, repair, and completely rebuild devices. Honestly, if anyone could take stolen blueprints and manufacture a black market iPhone, it would absolutely be the experts right here in Fortune Bay.
But when you actually talk to the people on the ground, they provide an incredibly blunt reality check. Recreating an iPhone 13 Pro from a leaked schematic? It's basically impossible. As one electronics seller put it, you can't really make anything from those drawings. At most, you can make phone cases. And why is that? Because a drawing is just a drawing. These technicians cannot get their hands on the proprietary parts, they can't get the specialized chips, and they definitely cannot get the closed software.
So what can you actually get on the market? Well, what we did find in the search for unauthorized Apple products was a really not-so-convincing copycat priced at a mere $29.
Yeah, $29. This extremely cheap knockoff is brilliantly and completely falsely marketed as the 17 Pro Mini, which, as you might know, is a baby iPhone that Apple has never even manufactured. As another seller at the market pointed out, these devices might vaguely look like an iPhone on the outside to fool a really quick glance, but the insides are entirely different. The leaked blueprints simply do not translate into functional, high-end technology without the actual legitimate supply chain behind it.
Which brings us to our final thought. This entire saga, from the Tata Electronics hack in India to the propaganda push in China, all the way down to the $29 fakes in Fortune Bay, it really leaves us wondering about the true nature of global tech dominance. Think about it. If even perfectly stolen blueprints can't recreate an iPhone without the proprietary chips and closed software ecosystem, is the real tech war actually about the parts, or is it about the massively complex network of people and systems required to put them together? It certainly proves that complete supply chain diversification is a messy, highly complicated reality, but it's one that companies are willing to bet their absolute futures on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a whole new perspective on that device sitting right there in your pocket.